Okay. Can I share screen?
Go for it.
Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. I'm trying to get rid of this. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I always laugh when I end up doing these like parenting talk things, because I really want to stress the point that when it comes to parenting and specifically to teenagers, there really are no experts. My current status in my own house, like full disclosure. So, does it still work in Australia that you have 2 units, 3 units, and 4 units in HSC or whatever it's called?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so in Israel, it's a little bit different. In Israel, you have 3 units, 4 units, and 5 units. My current nickname amongst my teenage children is 2 units. Or in Hebrew, they call me shtei yechidot. So whenever I say anything stupid, I've got these 2 teenage boys looking at me going, Ken, shtei yechidot, Ken, like I'm an idiot. So I just want to preface that. My latest grounding parenting experience happened recently. So, we've come out of this crazy situation here in Israel. So on the first night of the bombings here, so it was around 9:00 at night, and my husband was stuck in Tel Aviv and he couldn't get back. And I had to get the kids into the bomb shelter. So we're going into the bomb shelter and I have a 10-year-old. And she's usually like a pretty chilled kid. And she starts having a full-blown anxiety attack. So she like couldn't breathe and she's hyperventilating. She's doing like proper trauma look, right? But I'm a trauma expert. I don't know if you know that about me. I do trauma. I'm fine with trauma. So she's sitting in the bomb shelter and she's like panicking and so I'm getting her to tap and I'm getting her to breathe. And then we come out of the bomb shelter because it was finished. And so they're like sitting down, and one of the things you do with trauma is you kind of try and get people thinking again. So I did this funny little exercise with her where I'm saying, okay, Eden, like just look around the room and find 5 things, and then use your hands and touch 4 things. And then I go to the ears and I go, okay, can you hear 3 things? And as I say that, the next siren goes off. So that was great. So we're back in the bomb shelter and she's having another panic attack. It's awesome. And I'm doing my tapping and I get her out. And I think I'm being this amazing parent. And she's sort of calming down, but like not quite. And eventually my 14-year-old who's watching his therapist mom do her therapy, I just see him sort of looking at me like this. And eventually he picks up his phone and he says, oh, Eddie, just take the telephone. And she takes the phone and she goes, oh my God, I feel so much better already. So that's like pretty much the lump sum of my parenting expertise. So I will say, as I sit here very humbly talking about your soon to be or starting to be teenage kids, I'm sure some of you already have teenagers. I really believe if there was one right way to get through adolescence, we would all be doing it. Okay, some of you may have seen this video once before. I just find it very funny. Just tell me if you can hear it.
My kids are grown now, but I'll tell you what, the teen years, I got to tell you, teenagers, I realized at some point my children had a 3-word vocabulary that just about covered everything you needed from them. Was an actual word. Did you study for that history test? Another one was, no, you can't spend the night at Joe's house. You flunked the history test. And then whatever, that word whatever. I'm telling you, I don't know if it was at a frequency, something, it came at me in a way that it affected my nerve system because every time they go, whatever, I wanted to blink them right in the eyes. Whatever, stop that. See, I believe teenagers are God's revenge on mankind. I think one day God was looking down over his creation and said, hey, let's see how they like it to create someone of their own image who denies their existence. All right. As I have perused the Bible cover to cover, it never mentions how old Satan was when he rejected God's authority. My guess, 16.
Okay. So I love making fun of teenagers because they're great to make fun of. But we've got to this sort of impasse where we start to like just be very eye-rolly about them. And we sort of say, oh, it's just their hormones, it's just their moods, they're just crazy. And then I hear my best, like parents always saying, oh, we just have to get through it. So pop culture seems to almost define the start of adolescence as just a real period of immaturity or a time period to just try and get through. But the truth is, when I work with parents, the minute we start to actually understand developmentally what's going on specifically in our kids' brains, we can start to actually look at adolescence a little differently. And that's going to be my goal with you tonight, to really understand as your kids are going into this bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah period, and then the ensuing of adolescence, really how we can start to understand them in a slightly more profound way than just crazy raging lunatics, which they are. And at the same time, there are a lot of other things too. So the first thing, I love Dr. Daniel Siegel. If you ever want to find anyone who explains the adolescent brain brilliantly, he's your guy. You know, the ideas and the things that we hold as adults are really being formed in our adolescent years. You know, societies don't evolve through genetics. Societies evolve through culture. And so if we want society, and clearly if you look around the world today, we really, you know, other than our extreme wokeness, we really need our societies to start evolving. And that's only going to happen through our teenagers, because the people that they start becoming, the way of thinking that our adolescents start to be, is what's going to shift the world culturally for years to come. So if we just dismiss them as these raging people we just need to get through, we're missing a tremendous opportunity to really be able to start saying, hold on, like, you know, that old cliche, like I believe the children are our future kind of thing. Yes. And at the same time, the thinking of the culture is actually starting to evolve right now with your 12 and 13-year-olds. So I first want to clarify that puberty and adolescence are not the same thing. Okay, we tend to think it's the same. Puberty is your child's physical body changes. They usually don't feel great in their body. They're usually a little bit uncomfortable. But when we talk about puberty, that's not actually what adolescence is. Okay, adolescence is the period that happens from age 12 until 24. And it is directly related to the development in the brain, nothing else. So whenever we're talking about the adolescent period, we're not actually talking about physically how your child is growing. We're talking about how their brain is changing and growing. Now, adolescence has become a little bit jaded at the moment, because it used to be 150 years ago, the average age for a girl to get her period was somewhere between 15 and 16. And the average age for marriage was around 18. So those crazy years in between childhood and adolescence were about 2. Okay, now what we find is girls are getting their periods a little bit earlier. It's starting at around 11 or 12. Some kids, it's way earlier. It's even like 9, 10 years old. That's pretty common too. But the average age where our kids start taking on adult responsibility, getting married, moving out of home, you know, being independent, is happening somewhere between 24 and 34, which means the whole period of adolescence has essentially extended from something as little as 2 years to about 2 decades. And so if we approach adolescence as a time period with our kids that we just have to get through because they're crazy and we can't stand them, we're actually going to be missing about 2 decades of our kids' lives. And so my thinking is that we have to start figuring out a very different way to approaching adolescence and how to parent it and how to be present to it. And so the first thing we really have to do is actually understand it. So I hope you guys don't mind if I'm going to take a little bit of time to actually teach you about the adolescent brain and the brain in general, because it's pretty fascinating. And it helps to understand trauma, to understand all sorts of things. It's really helpful when we can figure out how the brain is working. So can you all see my hand? You have to nod really like this because I can't see any of you. Okay. So inside over here, on the inside of our brain, around about where my palm is, so this is very internally, we have our reactive system, okay? Within the reactive system is wake and sleep, and also our nervous system responses. So fight, flight, and freeze are located over here. This is all related to a polyvagal nerve. So that starts around your eyes, this nerve, and it travels all the way down the back and into your stomach. And you even have neurons surrounding your stomach and your gut. That's why you'll often see kids that are very reactive and adults that are very stressed out and very sort of buzzy and edgy. You'll often, or just highly anxious kids, you'll often find them with things like irritable bowel syndrome or different levels of stress around the stomach, because it's literally related through our eyes all the way down to the reactive system. The reactive system works a little bit like this. I don't know if it will be so effective because I'm not so loud, but just watch your bodies as I do this, okay? If I'm to go, no, just notice what happens. If I even said again, no, see what happens. And now if I were to turn to you and say, yes, yes, yes. I don't know if you could notice yourself calming down. So the reactive system is the part that puts us into a place like this. But when we're in the reactive system, I'm going to teach you in a minute about the other parts of your brain, but know that they're not working. They've gone out to lunch. The brain looks like this, and the reactive system is over here. So as parents, the first part of the reactive system that you have to remember is it's developing in your adolescent child, and that we should be using yes far more than we say no. Okay, the next part you have to know about is the limbic part of the system here and all over here, which controls our emotions. So happy, sad, angry, mad, overwhelmed. Okay, and this is also the motivation system. So in teenagers, that's really developing a lot right now. Okay, it's also the amygdala that locates us in time and space. And all these things are really developing with a kid. They're sort of figuring out, it's the evaluation part of the brain. Is this a good idea? Isn't this a good idea? And motivation is really important. So the only piece I would comment on for this talk anyway is on drugs. While I don't have huge opinions about it with kids, at least not in this talk. The one thing we know, for example, about marijuana, while it could be good, could not be good, is we know it affects the motivational system of the brain. In adulthood, that's less problematic. In adolescence, when that's developing, this whole part all here. So it's pretty important that our kids aren't getting overly exposed to things that attack their motivation, because they really need it. Also, wherever we put our attention is what's going to grow. So motivation, figuring out feelings, it's really important that we start to put emphasis, because these things are developing for kids. Passion, any skills we like, dancing, music, singing, mathematics, anything that kids are passionate about, all of this is developing now. The other thing that's really important, I'm going to come back to the brain in a second, is this idea around attachment and adolescence, okay? Because this is all the soothing emotional parts. So I always say that adolescents are a little bit like toddlers, just grown-up versions, okay? And so toddlers in the therapy world, they talk a lot about attachment, which means a baby from 0 to 2 needs a caretaker who's seeing them, keeping them safe, taking care of all their needs. And if a baby gets that from 0 to 2, they can pretty much learn how to become adults who can connect and form relationships. It's sort of created a security in their brain. Adolescents also really need attachment. The truth is we all need attachment, but because their brains are developing at such a fast pace, attachment becomes really important in adolescent years. So what it looks like is adolescents need to be seen. And I don't mean physically seen. I mean, they need to be seen in their minds, behind their behavior. Their behavior can be pretty revolting, let's be honest, but it's almost like someone giving presence to their experience. That's number one. Number two, adolescents need to feel safe, okay? No voices don't really necessarily feel safe. In fact, one of the scariest statistics I read is around 10 to 15% of children are scared of their caretakers. That means their parents. And I'm not talking about in abusive families. I'm talking about in regular families where there's lots of no going on, lots of stuff putting kids into their reactive systems where they're a bit edgy, lots of shouting, lots of fighting, right? Adolescents need to hear a lot of yes. Their brains need the experience of feeling safe and feeling soothed, okay? When we have adolescents who feel seen, safe, and soothed, they feel secure. So that's all great and well. Are you all following me so far? We're going through the brain and then we'll get to the fun stuff. So security in adolescence is really not about having perfect parents. It's just about having parents who are really present to what's going on. So if we sort of take the line of, oh my God, these teenagers are so annoying, we just have to get through them, then we're not seeing them, we're not creating safety, we're not soothing, and we're certainly not a secure base. They're developing, their brains are, the pace and speed of brain development is so crazy that the need for attachment, the need for our human presence of just seeing them, not necessarily agreeing with them, is really important. There's another piece that goes on in this development, okay? Rooted here in the limbic system, over here, while they need attachment, rooted right here in the brain, adolescents do this crazy, crazy weird thing where they start to push back on their parents. If any of you, I have a friend of mine who joked, he said his daughter turned 12 and he went from being like a god to having a second wife. Okay, are any of your kids starting to eye roll and they look at you like you're an idiot? Like my 16-year-old literally looked at me the other day and he went, and you're the therapist, right? They just think you're clueless. So it's not actually cultural. We think, oh, that's just what they do because they're being cool. It's not. It's actually rooted in the limbic part of the brain, right? Which what happens? You know, when kids are babies and they have all their needs taken care of them, right? Like we change them and we feed them and we carry them if they're tired and we put them to bed and we make sure we cut their food up. Right? It's great. Who would ever in their right minds want to give that up? It's awesome, right? So what happens though is our teenagers physically, they go through puberty and they start growing. So it becomes like highly inappropriate for us to be caring for them in that same way because they're actually just physically too big. And so the brain has to play catch up to the body. And so the limbic system does this crazy thing where our teenagers very much need adults in their lives, but they start to push back on the adults who raise them, called parents. And that feels nasty. And so they a little bit feel like, there was once this awesome book title called I Hate You, Get Out of My Life, but could you please take me and Sarah to the mall? It's a little bit that, of there's a piece in the brain saying, you've got to start. We know you need attachment. We know you need to feel safe and secure and seen and soothed. But you know those people called your parents? You're going to get that from other people. So if your kid is kind of being pushed by their brain to start venturing out into the world because their brain is saying your parents can't caretake for you in exactly the same way, and they start sort of leaving the family system, can anyone guess? You can jump in and say where they're going to go. I can't hear any of you. So I'll jump in and say, you know, if your kid is leaving the nest and it's really very scary, the number one thing that they're going to really want to make sure is that they're not alone. So guess what? In your 12 and 13-year-old life, because their brain is saying, time to get moving, your body's getting big, we love your parents, but they can't be your everything. Guess who's going to become life or death important to your child? Well, if you didn't guess it, friends. In fact, some friends become so important to teenagers that they almost become like a second family. The challenge of friends in our kids' lives right now is that their lives are chopped and cropped and filtered and stuck on Facebook and Instagram. And while our kids are venturing out and they're sort of looking at their friends to be their people, to make sure they're not alone, they're also keenly aware that their friends are as limited as they are. And so they kind of do this dance where they're looking back at us and moving away from us. And our real challenge as we start to have these adolescent kids is to say, okay, so how do we start to create presence? You know, fitting in becomes very, very important. You know, I was sitting with a teenage client and she started crying to me about her shoes and that her mom wouldn't buy her the shoes she wanted. And while part of me was literally rolling my eyes and wanting to like stab toothpicks in them because I was so bored and I couldn't believe I was actually having this conversation, part of me had to get presence to the idea that fitting in and having the right shoes and the right clothes and the right everything feels like life or death. Now, it doesn't mean that as parents, we have to say yes to everything that our kids want, but we at least have to appreciate the feeling. You know, and the other side of this is we can also relax a little when our kids start to move away from us and to know that that's really appropriate adolescent behavior. You know, I try not to be, but I'm quite critical of the parents who talk about their kids as their best friends. Your kids don't need you as best friends. They're going to make their own best friends. What they do need is for us to not get overly sensitive when they start to separate and venture out. It's rooted in their limbic system. They have to become individual and independent adults. Their brain is making them look around and say, hey, mom, dad, I'm me and you. And that's great. And so if we hold on and want them to be still our best friends or take everything very personally that they're finding their own lives, we're missing the point. What we have to become is people who are really present to the fact that their friends are everything and their friends aren't great barometers and they're checking and we're saying, it's okay, you got this. Before I play this video, the next piece of the brain that you have to know is this part here called the frontal cortex, which is this part over here, which is the way the brain really, the way kids start to think about things. So you said that, but did you mean that? They're not really sure. And this frontal cortex here, I don't know if you can see from my knuckles to here, that's the integration. So have a look here. It's my reactive system, my feeling system, my thinking system, and this part here, the frontal cortex, is the reactive system. That's developing right now during your adolescence. The reactive system puts it all together. The more integrated our kids can be between how they feel inside, their feelings, memory, thinking, the more integration we have here that holds all of that together, that's what healthy children look like. Kids who are getting a lot of no, a lot of being yelled at, a lot of feeling alone, a lot of misunderstood tend to go like this, and their brains get a little bit disintegrated. They're not so integrated, they're fragmented. Those are kids that we often see with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, or mental health issues that start to foster later on. So what we're going for in adolescence is to say this part of the brain's developing. It's the way they think and make sense of the world. Our presence and our being there as parents, our witnessing, our creating space is what's going to help them do it well. I'm going to teach you how to do that in a minute, but just so you get the concept. This here is Dan Siegel. He's going to explain it to you really beautifully.
The adolescent period is absolutely amazing. People often give it a negative approach, saying, oh, it's a time where adolescents are going to lose their mind, or they're just immature, or raging hormones drive them crazy. These are all not only wrong, but they're myths that mislead us and actually disempower us. Whether we're adults or adolescents, they actually give us the wrong message and they make it so there's nothing we can do. So what is actually the truth? The truth is that instead of raging hormones, what's happening is we have remodeling in the brain in ways we never could have predicted. We now understand two big things are happening in the brain, things you as an adult can support adolescents in developing well. And if you're an adolescent, you actually can use this to help your brain grow. in an optimal way. What are those two things? The brain is pruning itself. So imagine that in childhood, you're growing like a tree and establishing all these branches and all these leaves are growing. In the brain, that means connections among the basic cell, the neuron, called synapses, are being established. And you're soaking in the knowledge of the world, and that's beautiful. The tree is just growing, growing, growing. But then what happens that surprised everyone is the brain begins to prune itself. You start carving away some of those leaves, some of the smaller branches, even some of the larger branches. And the reason for the pruning is to specialize the brain. While the child is developing in ways that are really generalized, learning everything they can about everything they can, an adolescent is going to begin to find their passion, to actually find things they like, things they really love doing, and to drive their development in that way. So pruning is actually a use it or lose it principle underneath it. That if you don't use something, you're going to lose it. So if you like sports or like dancing or like music, do those things so you continue to establish those circuits. The second thing that happens in the remodeling adolescent brain is myelin formation. Myelin is a healthy sheath that allows connected neurons to communicate with each other in a much more effective way. How? It's 100 times faster, the signal that's sent down a neuron to communicate with another neuron, 100 times faster, and after it fires off, it's 30 times shorter the resting period that happens. 30 times 100 is 3,000. So when you put down myelin, you've made your neurons communicate 3,000 times more effectively. That's a great thing. Now, the great thing too is that you as an adolescent can actually use the focus of your attention to be aware of your emotions, aware of other people, to be engaging in activities, to be doing things with your thoughts that actually reinforce the parts of your brain you want to hold on to. So the good news about the remodeling story is that a field called neuroplasticity, how the brain responds to experience, shows us that what you do with your mind can change the activity and therefore the structure of your brain. So if you then come up with the statement that the ultimate goal of brain remodeling is to make an integrated brain, to differentiate areas, that's the pruning, and myelinate them, that's the linkage. When you increase differentiation and linkage, you make the brain more integrated. And an integrated brain is the pathway toward well-being. And you can do mind-sight exercises. These are exercises that increase insight, empathy, and integration. And if you do them as an adolescent, and you can also do them as an adult, you'll actually increase the integration of your brain as your brain is growing, not just during adolescence, but throughout the lifespan. And what's the outcome of integration? When integration is made visible, it's kindness and compassion. And so what we see through adolescent development is that our relationships become built on connections that are deep and filled with honoring each other's vulnerability, that's kindness, and supporting connections that are compassionate, filled with a sense of caring about other people and wanting to help them. This is the kind of world we can build as we move through life and support each other in our development.
Okay, so have any of you ever built a house? You know, we don't ever refer to a house that's being built as immature, you know, and we even acknowledge that when a house is being built for some period of time, we just remodeled our bathroom. And like at one point, the electricity went out. And then at one point, the blind wasn't working. Like we kind of get that when we're remodeling, things are going to be a bit funky. What we tend to do with adolescents is we tend to say, oh my God, they're so crazy, they're so immature, they're so whatever. When what actually is happening is they're just remodeling. They're just building their new houses, okay? And if we can hold that, as we're starting to do this parenting piece, we can start to parent with a little bit more wisdom, okay? The other thing you have to know about your adolescents in their brain, remember I said to you that we've got this new little frontal cortex. It's brand new, okay? It's just developing. It only starts around age 12 and 13, but it's out to lunch. It doesn't have it so well. So it's kind of like I gave your kids a brand new Xbox and I gave them 0 instructions and they're figuring it out. But they've got this whole emotional piece pushing on it, right? It's literally pushing on it. Too many no's and they flap right out of it, right? Reactive system or bombs going off or whatever, right? Highly reactive kids in Israel right now, okay? But the emotional part is right there, which means our teenagers are often really, really emotional. They're not just hormonal, they're emotional. And what else it means is because this frontal cortex, which is you said that, but did you mean that, is just developing, they also are not great mind readers. So what they tend to do is, I don't know if any of you have come home and you just came home. It happens to me. I just came home and one of your snarky little teenagers looks at you and goes, "Why are you looking at me like that?" And you're like, "What? I see you're looking at me funny." And you're like, "I don't even know what you're talking about." Right? They're terrible mind readers. And so when we know that it's just this part junking on this newly developing part, we can be like, "Oh, it's just a teenage moment." And we can be a little bit dismissive of it. If I suddenly get all reactive about them being a bit crazy or a bit remodelly, okay, then I'll be like, "Why are you talking to me like that? What's wrong with you? Who do you think you are?" Now I am reactive. Then they're going to look at me. So you see, I knew you were angry with me. Okay. So we have to be able to decipher, like, when is stuff really going on? And when are they just remodeling? Like, when is it just a little bit teenagey and we need to get a grip? Okay. While they're remodeling, okay, because so much is going on everywhere, what you start to discover by about age 12 and 13 is that your use for control over your teenage is going to get lower and lower and lower. You know, the "mommy said you can't" is going to work less and less and less. But the voice that you put in your kid's head, the voice that says, "What do you think about that? How would you like to do it?" Or the one that comes up with ideas around the voice, your influential voice, that your kids are going to hear for decades to come. Your voice of influence when all of these changes are going on is very, very high. Just put a show of hands up because I can't really hear you guys. How many of you, when you think of something big or you're trying to decide something or you're confused, how many of you today still hear your parents' voices in your head? Right? Those voices, I could guarantee you, didn't come from when you were adults. They came when you were remodeling as adolescents. So the same is true going on here. Okay, one sec. The next piece you have to know is because teens have to get out of their family home, right? Remember the limbic system, they're moving, right? They're figuring out who they are. They're going to their friends, great, becoming their own person, integrating their brain, all that crazy. What they tend to do is to start engage in really risky behaviors. Now, risky behaviors are necessary. Kids have to take risks in order to become individuals, right? That's great. And yet we start to notice things. Adolescents have the highest percentage of preventable deaths, the highest percentage of car accidents. That's why your car insurance is so high. Most crazy accidents, crazy, scary things happen during adolescence. Because while they need to do this risky behavior, okay, they have this little thing called hyper-rational thinking. We made the big mistake. I don't know about you guys, but I remember growing up in Australia and there was a lot of, education around the dangers of alcohol or the dangers of drugs. Kids really do know. They are highly well informed. They have no shortage of information at their disposal at all. They know all about everything. They know more than we know about everything. They have zero lack of information. What they have is hyper-rational thinking, which kind of says, yeah, it'll be fine. Now they need this risk-taking. And at the same time, the hyper-rational thinking, which tends to minimize the cons and maximize the pros, is really high at the moment. And there's only one way that we can start to manage that with kids, okay? Which is to build the muscle for them to use their hearts and their guts and their intuitive thinking, to really develop what I call, it was my son's birthday. And so I gave him a compass. And he said to me, "What is this, Mom?" I gave him a necklace with a compass on it. And I said, because these are the years where you have to figure out what your true north is, where you have to figure out how to listen to that own voice inside of you, even when everyone's walking east. this part now of adolescence, of kids figuring out, while they're prone to risky behaviors and they're prone neurologically for hyper-rational thinking, is we have to develop the part in them, inside of them, that can listen to their hearts and their guts and their internal wisdom. You know, I had this really funny day with my daughter. It was actually a while ago. We were shopping for clothes for my son's bar mitzvah, and she's into everything frilly and sequiny and all the things. I was like, can't we go for a little hippie, a little whatever? We're not sharing clothing taste. And I was about to butt in and say to her, you can't wear that. And I caught myself. And she came out with this crazy sequence dress and she went, oh my God, Mom, I love it. I look just like an ice cream. And I was like, yeah, you do. But I had this brief moment of saying, if I can't teach her to trust what she likes to wear, how am I ever going to teach her to listen what's inside of her? So now when our kids are 12 and 13, and you know that you're the voice in their head, you want to be the parent who starts thinking about how many times am I just saying, no, you can't do that, and then getting into control where they can. And how many times am I becoming the parent who says, well, yes, maybe, or being the voice in their head that asks them good questions to access their gut. How and what are good questions. So when your kid brings, I don't know, a whole bunch of alcohol to a party that's sponsored by Masada School, instead of being the voice that says, you can't do that, are you crazy, you're such an idiot, you want to be the voice that says, what were you hoping for? What were you thinking about when you brought all that alcohol to school? And you'll usually discover their internal voice saying, well, I was hoping that maybe kids would like me, or I was hoping to create great memories to tell when I was an adult, or I was hyper-rational thinking that I wasn't going to get caught and it would just be a lot of fun. But we want to start developing our voice of influence to manage kids who are at risky behaviors and hyper-rational thinking. Okay, so how do we start teaching kids to find and listen to their internal voices? And where do they discover, where do they discover the wisdom that they hold inside of them? So the truth is, there are a million ways that you can do this. There are a million ways to be an influential parent. But for tonight, I want to just share, if we have time, I want to just share quickly 4 of them with you guys. Okay, so the first one is this. Heal your broken parts, okay? Inside each of you is your own inner child. In fact, usually I find the only difference often between us and our children is a few years and the fact that we drive and have credit cards and hopefully pay our bills, okay? But I love the saying that if we don't heal from what hurt us, we will bleed on people who didn't. Sorry, I can't even see that quote. We'll bleed on the people who didn't, right? In terms of, guys, we have to sort our stuff out. You know, even in my own practice, I started off as a therapist working mostly with adolescents. And I will tell you today that mostly due to my own insistence, my practice is mostly 80% adults and parents and 20% teenagers. Because I eventually find myself saying to parents, your kids are great. Your kids are not broken. They're being typical adolescents, developing their brain and figuring out the world. Go sort your stuff out. You know, we tend to confuse our children's journey with our own. Our children are not extensions of us. I couldn't emphasize this more. They have their own lives, their own journey, their own paths to figure out. And if we are putting our own broken parts, oh, they must be so worried about this. Oh, they must be so anxious. Oh, these feelings aren't okay. All our own internal stuff, we need to sort it out. And instead of being very quick to throw adolescents into therapy, first check ourselves in. You know, if we have really angry adolescents, it may be because they're very reactive because home is very angry right now. And so maybe it's time to talk about couples therapy. Maybe it's time to talk about what made me such an angry adult. But we have to start healing ourselves before we put all the focus on our kids. That's number 1. Number 2, when it comes to developing healthy inner core for adolescents, we have to start separating out between what I call healthy striving and perfectionism. Healthy striving, and you saw in the video with Dan Siegel, your kids are developing passion, they're developing things they love to do, and their brains are saying, if I don't use it, I'm gonna lose it. So healthy striving is the things that I love to do, the things that excite me, the things that I'm good at, my sense of achievement, my sense, I didn't put this on the slide, but my sense of contribution. What can I do for the world? How can I volunteer? How can I give? You know, one of the things I love about Israeli society is, while their education system is really limited, the spirit of volunteerism that you see amongst youth in Israel is unbelievable. You know, I often wonder what makes Israel one of the happiest countries in the world when we have such financial stress in Israel and we're constantly bombarded with war. And I really believe because the sense of contribution amongst youth is incredibly high. That's healthy striving. Perfectionism amongst kids looks like, what will people think? How can we pretend to be perfect? How can we pretend to be the perfect family? Parents who are so invested in outcome rather than process. So getting straight A's, topping HSC, being the best in your class, being amazing at sport because you have to be good at everything, right? That strive for perfectionism is killing kids. And it's taking them away from their gut voice, which they so desperately need. Their brains are going hoo-ha, and they need the voice inside that says, what do I love? What am I good at? What speaks to me? And as parents, when your kids are becoming adolescents, if you are throwing perfectionism at them rather than healthy striving, you're going to send them into that fragmented brain rather than the brain, that part here that says, oh, what do I love to do? Oh, what am I good at? Okay. And so we really, really, when we're looking for internal gut and influence with kids, because we don't have control, we want to look for healthy striving. Number 3 is permission to be human. So I can't tell you. Well, let me ask a question to you. How many of you are really concerned that your kids should be full of confidence and full of self-esteem right now? Be honest, put your hands up. How many of you really want confident, full of self-esteem teenagers? Okay, great. Okay, so I'd like you to just do a little activity with me for 1 second. Close your eyes, if you may, and just allow an image to bubble up of yourself when you were a teenager. Just kind of get yourself there. What did you look like? How were you standing? How aware were you of what everyone else was thinking? Like truly, truly, when you see that little adolescent version of yourself, how good, confident, secure were you feeling? So my guess, did everyone get an image? My guess is that you were going to be just like every other adolescent I've ever met, which is you were going to be feeling largely insecure, largely uncomfortable, and not particularly confident. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't involve our kids to engage in passion and healthy striving and things that they love. That builds confidence. But there is nothing more pressurizing to a 12 or 13-year-old kid who is getting a brand new body, which is exhausting and scary, and children often feel betrayed by their bodies that either grow too fast or too slow, that are getting a brand new brain, and that are also getting hormones on top of it. When they have to feel this pressure from their parents that they have to also now be confident and really like themselves. They don't. They will, just like all of us did. So I call this permission to be human. Tal Ben Shachar tells this amazing story that he had bought. Tal Ben Shachar is one of the big guys in the world of positive psychology. And he had bought a hat for his son, David. His son was about 5 at the time, and he buys a brand new hat. Look, lucky I'm sitting in my teenage son's room. So he buys a hat for David, and lo and behold, the hat doesn't fit. So he goes, he says, oh, David, don't cry. I'll just adjust the hat for you. And he tries to adjust the hat, and the hat's not fitting. And David's getting more and more upset. And he says, wait, David, I'll fix it. Still not fitting. Now, one of the big things of positive psychology is that we have to be grateful, and this habit of gratitude. So he starts lecturing his son, saying, David, you know, you should be thankful. Daddy bought you a new hat. Just say thank you. It's not nice to cry. It's not nice to be ungrateful. And the more he's lecturing his kid, the more David, the 5-year-old, starts tantruming and crying on the floor, going, right, fully losing it. And at that moment, Tal Ben Shachar gets a grip of himself and he says, look, maybe the whole gratitude thing isn't working. And he gets on his knees and he looks his son in the eyes. He does that thing that we spoke about, right? Really seeing a kid. And he sees him and he says, I'm really sorry that the hat didn't fit. And David goes, says, I know you really wanted to like wear it to school and show your friends. And David goes, and then he says, I'm really sorry, it doesn't fit. And then about 1 second later, his little son gets up and says, hey, Dad, I can walk like a dinosaur. And he starts walking across the room. And Tal Ben Shachar says, you know, when we give people, ourselves and our children, permission to just be human, they can go from screaming, crying, tantrums to walking like dinosaurs in minutes. When we just give our teenage, adolescent, your 12 and 13-year-old kids permission to feel grossly uncomfortable, to feel not so confident, to say it's okay to not have the highest self-esteem at 12 and 13. It's cool. They can find their dinosaur. But if they're living in the pressure that they always have to feel good and always have to feel amazing, we make it really hard for them. So I'm going to beg you, as you're parenting your bar and bat mitzvah kids, to back off on the feeling good. Sometimes it's okay to not be totally okay all the time. The next thing I want to say is that it's not our job to fix the world for our children. We can't fix the world for our kids. Sometimes, you know, I say this a lot to my clients. I don't know why or when this shocked me, but at some point in my adult life, it's going to sound so stupid, but I kind of clocked on that life is actually hard. And I don't know why we all think it's meant to be easy, because life is actually hard. You know, we struggle. There's lots of stuff going on here. And our job is not to change the world. It's not to make it easy for our kids, because life is actually hard. Our job is to build the container that says, you can do hard. You're okay, sweetie. It's cool. You can do hard. You know, I could not fix, as much as I would have liked to, I could not fix the world for my kids last week. It was pretty traumatic here in Israel, I won't lie. But it was this grossly humbling parenting moment where you just can't fix it. I couldn't even change all the lies and all the hate that my kids are reading. You know, Israeli kids know their history. And so they're like, I can't fix TikTok and I can't fix Instagram, right? I really can't manage the fact that the world is hard right now, and I couldn't save them from it. But what I could do is create a container to hold them. You know, when my daughter's having the panic attack or the anxiety attack in the bomb shelter, I can't fix that. So I could allow her to have it, permission to be human. I could give her a skill set of what to do with it. And then I can acknowledge they're watching me. You know, yesterday I was so appreciative. I had an Israeli mother come in and meet with me. And she said, Liza, I'm not doing well after last week. I'm really not coping. And she said, my kids aren't coping, but I know they're not coping because I'm not coping. And so she's like, I need a better container. And so we helped figure out ways for her to manage her anxiety so she could help her kids better. You know, I have like a visceral reaction to that saying. I don't know if you guys have heard it, where it says, you're only as happy as your most miserable child. I hate that saying with a passion because it's garbage. Like, could we just give our kids the right to their own miserable, bad, terrible, horrible, bad day and say they can have their bad day and they can have their life is hard, and we can create a container. It doesn't have to be our miserable bad day, because now they're having their bad day and they've got to worry about us falling apart and having a bad day. Could we just be a container that says, I got this, you got this, life is hard, but you know what? We can do hard. We don't have to fix everything. We can just see their brain is changing, and we can build presence to it and say, wow, I totally get that. You're right. That was really difficult. I see you. Or I see you're really angry, or I see you're dysregulated, or I got you. Soothe, safe, seen, right? That's what kids need. And when we can start to create a container, if I feel myself being out of kilter, but I can create a container for them, then they can start to function and manage the world, right? Then they can be, life is hard, but guess what? We can do really hard things. You know, I notice a lot at bar and bat mitzvah time, this obsession with teaching kids that they always have to be liked and they always have to be invited. You know, I used to run social skills groups, and the amount of kids that used to come crying because they hadn't been included in something, and parents who were phoning the schools and phoning other parents. We have to teach our kids, you know what? You're not always going to get invited. You know what else? Not everyone's going to like you. So what? Why should everyone like you? They don't have to like you. It's not your job to be liked by everyone. It's your job to find your own voice, to find what you love, to find what you're good at, right? Kids that are trying to be liked by everyone can't integrate. They can't get the part that says, well, what do I think? How do I feel? We can teach them to be kind. We can say, you're not going to get invited to everything, but when it's your chance to invite, include. But we have to build the coping mechanism that says, not everyone's going to like you. So what? You're great. What does your voice have to say? Right? That's what building parental presence looks like. That's what getting kids through adolescence looks like. It looks like really saying, life is hard. You're going through a lot of changes right now. But guess what, love? I'm here. I see you, and we can do hard. So that's where I want to leave it for now. I think when we can start to really understand how our kids are thinking, how their brains are working, and get a little bit lost in the adolescent crazy, we can really build presence. Oh, this is just them and teenage development. And then when we can get that part, we can start to say, okay, how do I be a present parent with the goal of teaching them how to listen to their internal voice? Kids with internal voices can do amazing things. And they can manage risk-taking behaviors. They can manage the thing that makes them, you know, dismiss the cons and really focus on pros. They can really start to navigate the world. But we have to be the parents creating that container, saying, I see you, I soothe you, I create safety for you, I create security, and we can hold it for them while that's developing. If we're the parents responding to just all the brain crazy and saying, oh, just ignore them and get them through it, then we are literally missing the most profound opportunity to become the voices in our children's heads, just like the voices in your own. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if there's any questions or concerns or any thoughts that you guys have or may want to share.
Hassan, can you hear us, Liz? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe you can switch. You can
See me?
stop your share screen.
Oh, wait, thank you. Okay, hold on, my mouse killed it. Yeah, can you stop it or can only I stop it?
You
Wait,
can stop it.
okay, there we go.
All right.
Hi,
Cheers.
Liza, Terry, Evian. How are you?
Hello.
Son's bar mitzvah this weekend.
This weekend.
Mazel tov.
Thank you very much. A question for you. You spoke in the one slide there was about the adolescents finding a second home. Like I assume that is to do with, you know, living at their friend's house, not literally living at the friend's house, but being at one friend's house, and you know, you become a second set of parents to the friends of your kids. How do you deal with friends of your kids? Like, should you deal with them like when they start coming to you for advice or thoughts, or should you treat them as if they're your own, or is there a different type of angle you got to deal with your friend's friend, your kids' friends?
So I think teenagers really need adults in their lives. They just often don't want it to be their parents. You know, so that's where mentors become really important. Madrichim, therapists even are often really helpful. And when you're becoming a parent / therapist to your friends' kids, so there's two things that I really encourage parents is form your village. You know, if we can do away with everyone's children having to be perfect and acknowledge that all of us have children who are struggling with something, then the secrecy and shame around kids not being okay can diminish a little. And a lot of the time, if kids are coming to you and not to their own parents, I guess it is because either their parents aren't the container to chat with, or they just don't want it to be their parents. But often there's things that their parents need to know so that they can help them. And if we're a village that says, you know, we used to have this debate in Israel, if you see a kid riding without a helmet, a bike, you know, the roads here are really dangerous. So if you see a kid riding a bike without a helmet, do you tell the parents? And it was a real debate, like, would the parent take it from me? Like, oh, I'm trying to out them like they're being a rubbish parent, or would they really take it from me? It's really dangerous. Your kid needs a helmet. And you can obviously use this metaphor for other things. And I'm of the belief if my kid's without a helmet, I'd like to know about it so I could give them the help that they need. But that can only happen if we can really create a village of parents to say, let's lose the shame and the arrogance. We're all struggling. Today it's my kid, tomorrow it's yours. You know, as a therapist that works with kids and parents, my most humbling thing is to know that my children are not perfect. And I think if kids are coming and talking to you, to also really know your own line. You know, when kids are talking around mental health stuff, feeling depressed, suicide, you know, a lot of like really at-risk behaviors, we have to know our skill sets. And sometimes betraying confidence is saving a kid's life. You know, like I'll often say to kids, I really want to keep this confidential between you and me, but I'm worried if I do, I'm going to enable you to harm yourself, and I can't do that. So you're going to hate me, but I'm going to save your life in the process. You know, if it's just that they want a third person to kick back with and hang out with, then it's great for people to have other adults that aren't their parents, because they do need it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. All right. Well, Ness, you want to finish and wrap up? I'll wrap up. All right.
Thank you, Liza.
Okay.
Pleasure.
Amazing. I've had 2 teenage workshops with you now. My kids are only little, so keep coming back and forth.
Be
Thank
well prepared. You know, you have to like do it really humbly. Did I just lose you? But I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So thank you so much for, again, thank you on behalf of our Bar and Bar Mitzvah families, and lovely to see you again, and thank you. All appreciate it. So,
Cool. Bye, everybody. Good luck with your adolescence. Okay.
All right, Lana, to everybody, thank you so much. Have a wonderful Mazel Tov and family for this weekend. And do you want me to send you the recording?
Sure.